Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, everybody. John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 128 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. I've got another cartridge comparison episode for you today. Well, we've been talking a lot about Cape buffalo hunting so far in 2021, and the last few episodes have been cartridge comparisons on popular dangerous game cartridges. So far, we've talked about the 4.58 Win Mag and the 4.58 Lot in episode 126, and last week in episode 127, we talked about the 4.16 Rigby, the 4.16 Remington Magnum, and the 4.16 Ruger. Following along that same trend, we are going to step down a little bit in caliber yet again today and discuss a few slightly smaller but still really effective and popular dangerous game cartridges today in the 9.3x62mm Mauser, the 3.75 Holland and Holland Magnum, and the 3.75 Ruger. Though not quite as big or powerful as the 45 or 4.16 caliber cartridges we have talked about in the past few episodes, the 9.3 and the 3.75s are all extremely popular among hunters who want a very effective and extremely versatile cartridge. Especially if we're talking about regular hunters, not professional hunters or guides. The 3.75 class of cartridges, and I do include the 9.3 in this general class, is by far the most popular. And while they're not often the dangerous game cartridge of choice for those who outfit or guide dangerous game hunts, large numbers of outfitters and guides have a rifle in one of these cartridges, usually 3.75 H&H, on hand as well to use as a client rifle or even for themselves if the need arises. As you'll see here shortly, this is because that class of cartridges is extremely effective and incredibly versatile. In fact, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that these cartridges are well suited for hunting virtually any species of big game in the world. If you wanted to choose one rifle that you could hunt the absolute widest variety of game possible, from javelina and white-tailed deer all the way up to moose, eland, Cape buffalo, and elephant, and of course everything in between, then I would recommend something from the 3.75 class of cartridges, most likely the 3.75 H&H, though you could definitely make a good argument for the others as well. So, in this episode, I'm going to do a detailed comparison of the 9.3x62mm Mauser, the 3.75 H&H Magnum, and the 3.75 Ruger, and discuss their pros and cons so you can make an informed decision if one of these is the best choice for you. Now, before we get started with that comparison, I want to remind you that the Arizona application deadline is coming up. This episode was released on 4 February 2021, and the Arizona deadline to apply for elk and pronghorn is 9 February. So if you're listening to this episode right after it releases, you still have time to get that application in if you want to hunt either of those species in Arizona or build points for them, but don't mess around either. Now, fortunately, Arizona is normally pretty good about doing this process relatively quickly, especially compared to certain other states. Arizona normally announces their draw results in early March, and I'm estimating they'll let you know around 5 March this year, and credit cards will start getting hit a few days before that if you end up drawing something. Now, this is good news because you'll probably know if you get drawn in Arizona before the application deadline in Utah, which is the next one, around 4 March, and New Mexico, which is around 17 March this year. Now, Arizona has a somewhat unique system with different deadlines for different species. So this upcoming deadline is only for elk and pronghorn, and they have an 8 June deadline for deer and sheep in 2021. Like I mentioned back in episode 123, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico are all part of my hunting draw plan. Arizona and Utah are both part of my long-term strategy, and while I will still put in this year, I realize I probably won't draw a tag in 2021, but hey, you never know. Now, since New Mexico doesn't have a point system, Nothing is ever guaranteed there, but you can quite often have better odds at drawing a tag there in any given year compared to many other states. Nobody can apply for every species in every state. I certainly don't. And depending on where you live, what your goals are, and what your budgetary constraints are, you might have different priorities from me, and that's fine. Now, if you haven't already done so, head on over to gohunt.com and sign up for their insider program to get the information you need to craft a plan to fulfill your dream hunt out west. They provide the essential information necessary to make a realistic plan to draw the tags for the species you are most interested in so you can make the most of your limited time and money. When I first signed up for my insider membership, I had already been applying in a couple of different states for a few years, and I got a rude shock when I discovered from Go Hunt that I had been applying for a bunch of hunts that I had literally no chance of drawing. Basically, I'd been throwing money away, and that really made me mad to learn that. However, things changed immediately once I signed up for my Go Hunt Insider membership. Using the information they provided, which was way better than the information I had had up to that point, I quickly adjusted my plan to some more realistic tags to apply for, and I started drawing stuff that very first year for what turned out to be some really great hunts. Long story short, the cost of my insider membership was money well spent, and I've saved way more money by not throwing it away on futile applications than I've spent on my entire Go Hunt membership for all the years I've been with them. So go to gohunt.com and sign up for an insider membership today. Use promo code BIGGAMEHUNTER when you do so for $50 in store credit at their online gear shop. Okay. Now let's talk about the 9.3x62mm Mauser, the 375 Holland and Holland Magnum, and the 375 Ruger. As always, I think it makes sense to talk a little bit about the history of these cartridges and the events that spurred their creation. Just like we talked about last week with the 416 Rigby, the 9.3x62 and the 375 H&H both came about due to two major advances in firearm technology in the early 20th century. And these advances were the introduction of cordite and other smokeless powders and the Mauser 98 rifle. Prior to these developments, hunters primarily used single-shot or double-barreled black powder firearms. Since black powder firearms have a relatively low velocity limit, by modern standards anyway, hunters pursuing dangerous game tended to use very large bore rifles firing very heavy bullets. These rifles produced an incredible amount of smoke and had immense recoil, even though they were also extremely heavy. And at the same time, those massive, slow-moving bullets did not penetrate very well, and the rifles took a long time to reload. Now, the hunting and shooting worlds changed forever in 1905 with the introduction of the 9.3x62mm Mauser cartridge. Designed by Otto Bach, the cartridge used smokeless powder, and the classic 9.3x62mm Mauser factory load fired a 286-grain bullet at 2,350 feet per second for just over 3,500 foot-pounds of energy. Just like with the 416 Rigby, the use of smokeless powder as a propellant enabled the 9.3x62 to achieve much higher velocities than the big bore black powder cartridges of the day. These significantly higher velocities enabled the use of smaller diameter 3.66 caliber bullets for this cartridge. This in turn resulted in bullets with significantly higher sectional densities, which correspondingly penetrated much more reliably than the old big-bore lead bullets. Sectional density is a measure of the ratio of the diameter of a projectile to its mass. All other things equal, a heavier projectile of a given caliber will be longer and therefore have a higher sectional density, and it will also penetrate deeper than projectiles with a lower mass and lower sectional density. Since bullet penetration is so important when hunting thick-skinned dangerous game, that advantage in sectional density is one factor that has very likely contributed to the reputation of the cartridge for being very effective on Cape buffalo. As you can imagine, big game hunters jumped at the chance to use a newer and more advanced cartridge. In addition to the incredible improvement in performance of the 9.3x62 compared to previous cartridges, Bach went a step further and designed the cartridge to operate in the revolutionary new bolt-action Mauser 98 rifle. A hunter equipped with a Mauser rifle could fire as many as 5 shots before emptying the magazine, compared to only 1 or 2 with earlier rifles. So not only was the 9.3x62 a dramatic improvement over the most common big game hunting cartridges of the day, but it could also be used in an inexpensive and reliable rifle that more than doubled the number of shots a hunter could fire before reloading. Not surprisingly, hunters quickly embraced the 9.3x62. The 9.3x62 was an especially big hit among German settlers in Africa, where it acquired a reputation for effectiveness on thick-skinned, dangerous game like Cape buffalo and elephant. And at the same time, the cartridge had a very manageable recoil and was also a great choice for the whole range of plains game. So not surprisingly, the 9.3x62 became a favorite among hunters who wanted a very versatile hunting cartridge that offered excellent all-around performance. Now, the 9.3x62 also had a big advantage because among the other cartridges that incorporated those same benefits to hunters, like the use of smokeless powder and availability in reasonably priced and very reliable bolt-action rifles, the 9.3x62 was among the first to hit the market. Now remember, that cartridge was first introduced in 1905. Now the introduction of that cartridge caught the major British gunmakers flat-footed. Fearful of losing their market share to a German cartridge, British gunmakers scrambled to develop cartridges that took advantage of the same advances in firearm technology and could compete with the Mauser cartridge. Now, of the cartridges I've talked about in this podcast series, the .416 Rigby was next, and it came along in 1911. Now, it was against this backdrop that gunmakers at Holland and Holland introduced the .375 belted rimless Nitro Express cartridge, better known as the .375 Holland and Holland Magnum, or the .375 H&H, in 1912. Those people likely had no idea that they had just designed what would eventually become one of the most successful big game hunting cartridges of all time. Indeed, though many other outstanding hunting cartridges have been developed over the century that has elapsed since the .375 H&H first entered the hunting scene, none have a track record of success quite as impressive as the .375 H&H. Just like the 9.3x62 and the .416 Rigby, the .375 H&H cartridge originally used a smokeless propellant, used a rimless case, and was built for use in bolt-action rifles. Since smokeless propellants are much more efficient than black powder, that cartridge could push bullets at significantly higher velocities than was previously possible. The original .375 H&H loads produced by Holland and Holland in 1912 used cordite as a propellant and used 3 primary bullet weights: a 235 grain bullet at about 2,800 feet per second, a 270 grain bullet at about 2,650 feet per second, and a 300 grain bullet at about 2,500 feet per second. All of these loads also have a relatively flat trajectory. It's not quite on par with something like the 30-06, but the .375, and to a lesser extent the 9.3, are somewhat surprisingly capable at extended range. So a hunter using one of those cartridges on a dangerous game hunt who encountered a really nice kudu or sable or impala, for instance, could take a 200 or even a 300-yard shot if necessary with much more confidence than would the case be if they were carrying a bigger bore rifle. Now, those loads featuring a 300 grain bullet in particular are incredibly effective for use on dangerous game, and they offer an excellent balance of reliable deep penetration and plenty of authority on one hand, but a manageable amount of recoil on the other. Just like with the 9.3x62, these two factors were extremely important in helping the .375 H&H gain acceptance with hunters. While the .416 Rigby was indeed quite a bit more powerful, it also recoiled a heck of a lot more. On the other hand, the .375 and the 9.3 were still powerful enough to get the job done in many situations, but they were much more pleasant to shoot. For a point of comparison, a typical .416 Rigby load firing a 400 grain bullet at 2,400 feet per second produces about 70% more free recoil energy than a .375 H&H firing a 300 grain bullet at 2,500 feet per second, and more than twice as much free recoil energy as a 9.3x62 firing a 286 grain bullet at 2,400 feet per second when they're all fired from the same weight rifle. Obviously, that is a gigantic difference in recoil, especially considering that the .375 and the 9.3 are both somewhat stout recoiling cartridges themselves. For what it's worth, 40 foot-pounds of free recoil energy is often considered a good benchmark for when recoil starts getting too much for most hunters to handle. Now, there's more that goes into it than that, and of course, some people can tolerate much more recoil than others, but Mr. or Miss Average Safari Hunter should be able to handle a rifle-cartridge combination producing about 40 foot-pounds of energy or less. In a 10-pound rifle, those 9.3 and .375 loads I just mentioned produce about 31 and 39 foot-pounds of energy respectively. So they're towards the upper end of that threshold, especially the .375, but they're still under it. Now, the gun makers at Holland & Holland also specifically designed the new .375 cartridge with optimum reliability under hot conditions in mind. Cordite is very temperature sensitive, and higher ambient temperatures will produce higher pressures with a given load. At the time, the British had extensive colonial interests in Africa and India, where hot weather is, of course, very common. For this reason, designers at Holland & Holland built the cartridge with a very gently tapering case to aid in chambering and extraction under a variety of environmental conditions. Now, the designers of the .375 H&H were very successful in their goal of building a reliable cartridge ideal for use under those conditions. As a matter of fact, even though modern smokeless propellants are much more temperature stable than cordite, the gently tapering case of the .375 is still very useful today, and the cartridge has a stellar reputation for reliable feeding and extraction in the field. When the chips are down and you need that next cartridge to smoothly chamber in order to stop a charging buffalo, it's really nice to have a gently tapered case that effortlessly slithers into the chamber. However, since the cartridge lacked both a sharp shoulder and a rim, the designers of the .375 H&H incorporated a revolutionary belt near the base of the cartridge to ensure correct headspace. Unfortunately, a gently tapering case is also relatively inefficient in terms of powder capacity. For this reason, the .375 H&H Magnum has a relatively long 72.39 millimeter case. This is over 10 millimeters longer than the 9.3x62 millimeter Mauser case. For this reason, the 9.3x62 fits in a standard length rifle action, while the longer .375 H&H Magnum is restricted to use in rifles with a longer Magnum length action. Rifles with Magnum length actions are typically larger, heavier, and more expensive than rifles with standard length actions, but that did not dramatically impact the popularity of the cartridge after it was introduced. More on this aspect of things in a second. Now, the 9.3x62 remained popular among hunters for many years, but it eventually faded after World War II. The German armaments industry suffered incredible damage during the war, which obviously made 9.3x62mm ammunition difficult to obtain. The .375 H&H did not suffer from this problem, and hunters in Africa started to replace their Mausers with the .375. The popularity of the cartridge got a further boost when Winchester started building a version of the legendary Model 70 rifle chambered in .375 H&H as well. As American hunters armed with the Model 70 flocked to the Dark Continent during the 20th century, and especially during the post-World War II period, the already common .375 surged in popularity to become one of the most popular big game hunting cartridges in Africa and never looked back. Now let's go back to what I was saying about standard versus Magnum length actions. The folks at Ruger and Hornady saw an opening there and decided to build a new rifle cartridge that basically duplicated the performance of the 375 H&H, but in a shorter, standard length rifle action. They called it the 375 Ruger and officially introduced it to the world in 2007. The 375 Ruger uses the same .532-inch bolt face as standard Magnum cartridges like the 375 H&H, 458 Win Mag, etc. However, unlike all of those cartridges, the 375 Ruger and its big brother, the 416 Ruger that we talked about last week, uses a beltless case. So the entire case is essentially the same diameter of the belt that protrudes from the case of the 375 H&H, and all the cartridges descended from it. This means that the Ruger cartridges have very large case capacities without being very long. This means that the 375 Ruger actually has a tiny bit more case capacity than the 375 H&H, and it fits in a shorter standard length action, same as the 30-06. For this reason, the 375 Ruger compares very favorably to the 375 H&H, and both cartridges perform at an almost identical level ballistically. Like the 375 H&H, the 375 Ruger is accurate, powerful enough to quickly and ethically kill virtually any species of big game, and like the 375 H&H, has a manageable amount of recoil that most shooters can handle. Considering the reputation of the 375 H&H, this is high praise indeed. In fact, most 375 Ruger loads actually slightly exceed the velocities delivered by standard 375 H&H loads when shooting the same weight bullet out of rifles with the same barrel length. However, this velocity edge is small enough that it doesn't make a bunch of a difference in reality. The 375 H&H is already a very capable cartridge at extended range, and while the 375 Ruger is a marginal improvement, the difference in trajectory between the cartridges is small. At the same time, the extra velocity doesn't make it much better at killing game, and I highly doubt any animal can tell the difference between a bullet fired at 2,500 feet per second versus 2,600 feet per second. However, this slight velocity advantage can allow rifles chambered in 375 Ruger to use shorter barrels and still have ballistics that are nearly the same as the 375 H&H when used in a longer barrel. When you combine this with the fact that the 375 Ruger fits in a shorter action, this allows hunters to use rifles that are shorter, lighter, and handier than comparable rifles chambered in 375 H&H. The shorter length of the 375 Ruger case is the primary selling point of the cartridge, and since it basically mirrors the 375 H&H in performance, the shorter case is a significant advantage. Instead of being restricted to using only the larger, more expensive Magnum length action rifles, the 375 Ruger opens up a whole line of great quality, commercially successful standard length action rifles that may be adapted for the cartridge and repurposed for dangerous game. Now let's talk about ammo for these cartridges. Since the 9.3, the 375 H&H, and the 375 Ruger are all intended for a specific niche in the hunting community, none is extremely popular in absolute terms. That said, these cartridges, and especially the 375 H&H, are all pretty widely used dangerous game cartridges. While the 9.3 is not extremely popular in North America, it is pretty darn popular in Europe. For this reason, there is a good selection of options from the big ammo manufacturers. Of course, the exception is the 375 Ruger. At this time, Hornady and Swift are the primary options for factory-loaded 375 Ruger ammo. Hornady offers the cartridge as part of their dangerous game line with the DGX bonded and DGS solid bullets. They also offer it as part of their outfitter line with a 250 grain GMX bullet. Swift offers ammo for the cartridge with their 300 grain A-frame and 300 grain breakaway solid bullets. Fortunately, those options are all very good, with the Hornady Outfitter load being great for just about everything but Cape Buffalo, so elk, moose, plains game, and even grizzly bear, and the other Hornady and Swift options are excellent choices for African dangerous game like hippo, elephant, and of course, Cape Buffalo. Now, as far as loaded ammo goes for the 375 H&H and 9.3, unless I say otherwise, the 9.3 is almost always loaded with 286 grain bullets, and the 375 primarily uses 300 grain bullets. Now, the 375 H&H is available from Barnes with their Vortex Safari line loaded with 300 grain TSX bullets. Unfortunately, like I mentioned last week in the 416 caliber episode, the 375 H&H is not available with their excellent banded solid bullet, which is available in 416 caliber though. Without going into detail on the subject, this is due to ATF regulations on armor-piercing ammo. So the banded solid bullets are not available in 375 or 458 caliber. However, they are available as loaded ammo for the 416 Remington and 416 Rigby, as well as component bullets for hand loaders. Those bullets are available in 9.3 millimeter though. Federal Premium used to sell loaded 9.3 ammo with those bullets, but it looks like that's no longer the case right now. Barnes does not offer loaded ammo in 9.3 millimeter with the banded solid, but the banded solid is available for hand loaders. I've shot that ammo in my 9.3 and it worked great for me. Okay, getting back to loaded ammo options. Federal Premium offers 375 H&H and 9.3 by 62 millimeter ammo in their Cape Shock line, loaded with Swift A-frame and Woodley Hydro solid bullets for both cartridges, and trophy bonded Bear Claw and Sledgehammer solid bullets in 375 H&H. They're also available from Hornady. The 375 is part of their Outfitter line with the 250 grain GMX, and as part of their Dangerous Game line, loaded with DGX bonded and DGS solid bullets. The 9.3 is available with the 250 grain GMX as well as 286 grain soft point interlock bullets. Norma offers ammo for both with their African PH line, loaded with Woodley Full Metal Jacket and soft nose bullets for the 375, and only the solids for the 9.3. Nosler offers ammo for both in their Safari line with Partition and Safari solid bullets, as well as their lead-free E-tip line and their regular trophy grade line. The E-tip ammo uses 250 grain bullets for the 9.3 and 260 grain bullets for the 375. Trophy grade ammo is available with a 250 grain AccuBond in 9.3 millimeter, as well as 260 grain Partitions and 300 grain AccuBond bullets in 375. And finally, Swift offers ammo for both with their high grade line, loaded with A-frame and breakaway solid bullets. While they're usually all much more expensive than smaller bore centerfire rifle hunting ammo, 9.3 millimeter ammo is generally moderately cheaper than 375 Ruger ammo, which is in turn a little cheaper than 375 H&H ammo. That said, factory ammo for these cartridges typically costs over $75 and often over $100 for a box of 20. That is not a hard and fast rule though, and it is definitely possible to find ammo for these cartridges, especially the 9.3, for cheaper than that. Not every sporting goods store carries ammo for these cartridges, but the big places often will, especially for the 375 H&H, which is by far the most common all over the world. The 9.3 by 62 is also very widely available in Europe, but less so in the USA. Additionally, reloading components for all of these cartridges are also widely available, and the high price of factory ammo and difficulty involved with obtaining a reliable supply of factory ammo at times makes all of these cartridges very popular among handloaders. Indeed, they all offer quite a bit of options for handloaders, and there is a pretty good selection of outstanding quality, 9.3mm and 3.75 caliber bullets suitable for use on just about any species of game in the world that reloaders can choose from. Just about all of those bullets I previously mentioned as available in factory ammo are also usually available as component bullets. Now let's talk about rifles. The rifle situation is very similar to the ammunition selection with these cartridges. Ruger is the primary option for 375 Ruger rifles, and they offer the Ruger Guide Gun, Hawkeye African, Hawkeye Alaskan, and FTW Hunter rifles in that cartridge. The Guide Gun and the Hawkeye African are both available in left-handed options as well. The Ruger No. 1 is no longer in current production in that chambering, but it was available in 375 Ruger too. Savage also offers their Model 110 Brush Hunter and Bear Hunter rifles in 375 Ruger as well. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the 9.3x62 is much more popular in Europe than in North America. Correspondingly, companies like CZ, Sako, Steyr, and Tikka are the best options for 9.3x62mm rifles these days. Ruger used to make rifles in that chambering as well, but not anymore. Not surprisingly, there are even more options for the 375 H&H. The Winchester Model 70 is a great option. Same goes for the Kimber Caprivi, the Sako 85, and various options from Steyr, etc. Now, until very recently, the CZ550 was a great option in both 9.3x62 and 375 H&H. Like I mentioned last week, unfortunately, it appears as though CZ just stopped production of the CZ550 in early 2021. Hopefully, this is a temporary measure since demand is still through the roof for guns and ammo right now, and I imagine that CZ is merely trying to focus their production efforts on other higher demand products. I think it would be a real shame if CZ completely stopped production of their Safari Magnum rifles, because they were a great option for hunters in 9.3, 375 H&H, 416 Rigby, 458 Lot, etc. Now, the 375 H&H was also available from Ruger at one time in their single-shot No. 1 rifles, as well as the Ruger M77 Mark II, and you can still find those on the secondary market from time to time. With all of that stuff in mind, the Winchester Model 70 is probably the best option for a dangerous game rifle in 375 H&H right now, and it's currently available in that chambering as part of Winchester's African and Alaskan lines for the Model 70. Now, the CZ550 remains an excellent option as well, if you can get one. Likewise, for Europeans, the 9.3x62 is an outstanding choice in general, with excellent availability in quality rifles. Like the 416 Ruger, but to an even greater extent, the 375 Ruger remains an excellent option for someone wanting a reasonably priced and capable and easily obtainable dangerous game rifle. Additionally, the weird thing is that even though it's primarily available from Ruger with a little bit from Savage, the 375 Ruger might actually be the easiest one of the bunch to get a reasonably priced factory new rifle for these days if you're a North American hunter. So which one is right for you? Do you need a cartridge ideally suited for hunting dangerous game like grizzly bear, Cape buffalo, or water buffalo? With modern ammo, all three cartridges are excellent choices. The 375 H&H has the longest proven reputation of the three, and it is really hard to go wrong with it. You also have lots of good ammo and several good rifle choices for that cartridge as well. There's nothing wrong with the 375 Ruger or the 9.3x62 though. I've hunted with all three of them extensively, and I really like all of them. I personally shot my buffalo in Zimbabwe a few years ago with a Ruger Hawkeye in 9.3x62. Now, that rifle started off as a 30-06, and then I got it rechambered to 9.3. Many African countries have a 375 minimum caliber for hunting dangerous game like Cape buffalo. Some countries, like Mozambique, do not have a minimum caliber. Zimbabwe has a minimum caliber of 9.2 millimeters. So the 9.3x62 is legal to use for hunting dangerous game in those countries as well as some other ones. The 9.3x62 is 3.66 caliber, so for countries like Botswana, Tanzania, Zambia, or certain provinces in South Africa, the 9.3x62 is technically not legal to hunt with, and you'll need to use a 375 H&H or Ruger or something bigger to meet that minimum caliber requirement. So that is really the big disadvantage of the 9.3x62. While it's extremely effective, has plenty of killing power on big game, and in fact, it even tends to sort of quote-unquote punch above its weight to a greater extent than you would think just looking at the paper ballistics on it. The cartridge just isn't legal to hunt dangerous game with in some places, so keep that in mind. Now, all three of those cartridges are really excellent choices for these sort of hunts where they're hard-hitting and relatively flat trajectory for dangerous game cartridges really stand out compared to the competition. Like I said, all are extremely versatile. If you want a single rifle to hunt the widest variety of game possible, they will all fit the bill. Don't let anyone try and tell you that they'll blow smaller game apart either. Those same heavier bullets in the 270 to 300 grain range that are ideal for really big and tough species of game are also quite effective on smaller species of game. Controlled expansion bullets will quickly take down medium and large species like eland, wildebeest, and impala without causing significant damage to their hides or destroying a bunch of meat. The same goes for even the smallest species of antelope like dik-dik, diker, and klipspringer when using non-expanding solids or full metal jacket bullets. So by all means, feel free to use any of these cartridges on a plains game hunt or a combination buffalo and plains game hunt. All three will work just fine, but yes, they do have more power than you need for deer, hogs, etc. Really, the biggest reason why you might not want to use the 9.3 or either of the 375s on smaller games is the cost of ammo and the fact they have a little bit more recoil than typical cartridges that are used for hunting medium game like that, like the 30-06 or the 270. Note that all three cartridges are also good options for hunting game like big brown bear or moose in places like Russia, Alaska, and Canada. This is especially true with the 375 H&H and to a lesser extent the 375 Ruger. In fact, many outfitters have an unofficial 375 caliber minimum to hunt brown bear. All things considered, the 375 H&H is a really solid performer here as well, especially under conditions where a longer range shot is a little bit more likely. Just like with Cape buffalo hunting in Africa, the 375 H&H might also be the single most popular cartridge for hunting those big bears these days as well. Now, what if you're a hunting guide or PH who needs a good stopping cartridge in case you or your clients get in a jam with an angry bear, elephant, or buffalo? Let me be clear here. None of these cartridges is a real stopper as far as buffalo is concerned. It is absolutely possible to kill a charging buffalo with any one of them, but none would be my first choice. Of all the stuff I've talked about in the podcast in these past few episodes, I'd put all of the 4.58s and all of the 4.16s ahead of these three. A decent number of PHs in Africa use the 375 H&H to back clients. Usually they are newer PHs who simply can't afford something better. As they get more established, almost all of those PHs move up to something more powerful. But if I had to pick something of these three cartridges, I would go with the 375 H&H because it is more powerful than the 9.3x62, and its overall design facilitates reliable feeding and extraction to a greater extent than the 375 Ruger. Are you a hand loader? All three cartridges are all great choices for hand loaders. Now, this is an important consideration when you consider how much factory ammo costs and how it can sometimes be hard to find. This is especially common with the 375 H&H and to a lesser extent the 375 Ruger. And that's actually one of the benefits with the 375 Ruger as well because it uses the exact same bullets as the 375 H&H. What if you are sensitive to recoil? While all three cartridges have fairly stout recoil, the 9.3x62 has noticeably less than the other two in identical rifles. Where it is legal to hunt with, this is the big advantage of the 9.3x62 because it provides about 90% of the power of the 375 H&H with about 80% of the recoil. Now, I've written a few really detailed articles about these three cartridges, and I will be sure to put a link to them in the show notes so you can check them out if you want. Now, what about you? Which one do you prefer? Do you like the 9.3x62mm Mauser, the 375 Holland and Holland Magnum, or the 375 Ruger? Like I mentioned earlier, I've hunted with all three of them, and I really like them all. And it's really hard to choose the best one out of the bunch. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Send me a direct message on Instagram. My handle is @thebiggamehunter, or you can send me an email, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com. Now, this is the last episode on Africa I'm going to do for a little while. Don't worry, I'm not done with them forever. To this point, though, I've done a bunch of shows on Africa to include all 5 shows so far in 2021. In the past couple years, I've done 2 episodes with Phil Massero, 4 episodes with Kevin Robertson, and a large number of solo episodes. If you've listened to all of those shows and really paid attention to what Kevin, Phil, and I had to say, then you have a pretty good base of information about hunting in Africa, and you probably know way more about the subject than most hunters. South Africa is open for business again, and my dad and I are planning on heading over in May of 2021 for buffalo and plains game. If you're ready to take the plunge and go on the hunt of a lifetime in Africa, then get in touch with me and I'll set you up with an outstanding hunt out in the bushveld for buffalo and or plains game. We have a few openings remaining for 2021, but we're almost completely full. 2022 is filling up fast as well, but I still have some great dates available. These hunts are for serious hunters who want to experience wild Africa. They're not for everybody, and I actually have to turn away people who are interested in hunting with us each year because I don't think they can hack it, or I think they're looking for something that we can't provide. But if you're a serious hunter looking for a true African hunting adventure, send me an email at john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com or visit bestsafarihunt.com, and I'll get you set up with that hunt you've always dreamed of. Mention that you heard about those hunts through the Big Game Hunting Podcast, and I will give you special pricing. Now, the fact that you are listening to this podcast means that you are serious about making your dreams come true. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.